Namaskar. Well, friends, let me heartily welcome you all to Bhim Bhashya, my audio visual podcast series on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. This audio visual podcast series has 54 short speeches on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, unraveling as many as 25 different dimensions of his multifaceted genius. Friends, this podcast series is focused on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, his thoughts, his actions, his philosophy, and above all, the grand vision that he had seen for our nation. That is what this podcast series is all about. So let's proceed. Well, friends, in this episode 42, I'm going to continue our discussion of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and his role as the principal architect of the Indian Constitution. In this particular episode, episode 42, I'm going to talk about the great beginning of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly. As you are aware, the Constituent Assembly elections were over in July 1946, and the Constituent Assembly was told to start its work. But the Muslim League had boycotted the working of the Constituent Assembly. In spite of the boycott by the Muslim League, the Constituent Assembly met for the first time on 9th December 1946, and it elected Dr. Rajendra Prasad as the president of the Constituent Assembly. On 13th December 1946, Jawaharlal Nehru laid the foundation of the Constituent Assembly's work by moving a resolution on the Declaration of Objectives. In a memorable speech, Jawaharlal Nehru declared independent sovereign republic as India's objective. During the discussion on this historic resolution, Dr. M.R. Jaikar, he moved an amendment seeking postponement of passing of the resolution until the Muslim League members joined the Constituent Assembly. Dr. Jaikar objected to the timing of the resolution. He wanted the Muslim League to join the task of laying down the foundation of the Constitution. This amendment created a tense atmosphere in the House. In the middle of this anxious situation, all of a sudden, Dr. Ambedkar was unexpectedly invited by the chair to speak on the issue. Dr. Ambedkar seized that opportunity and rose to the occasion, literally. At the outset, Dr. Ambedkar said that the resolution reminded him of the age-old Declaration of the Rights of Man, which was pronounced by the French Constituent Assembly nearly 450 years ago. Turning to the most crucial issue of national unity, Dr. Ambedkar, while admitting that Indian people are, in his words, divided politically, socially, and economically, like a group of warring camps. But he exuded optimism. He said, and I quote him, "I'm quite convinced that given time and circumstances, nothing in the world will prevent this country from becoming one." Referring to the ultimate objective of the country, Dr. Ambedkar indicated that our difficulty is, and I quote him, how to make the heterogeneous mass that we have today take a decision in common and march on the way which leads all of us to unity. Unquote. In this regard, he advised the Congress party that, and I quote him, it would be an act of great statesmanship for the majority party even to make a concession to the prejudices of people who are not prepared to march together. Unquote. Dr. Ambedkar even resorted to an emotional appeal. He said that, leaving the slogans and the harsh words aside, let us bring, and I quote him, let us bring our opponents in so that they may willingly join with us on marching upon this road, which, if we walk long enough, must necessarily lead us to unity. Unquote. Actually, what Dr. Ambedkar was saying was not materially different from what Dr. Jaikar had said. But Dr. Ambedkar put it in a totally different form, changing over from a legislative style to a statesman-like manner, recommending yet another attempt at reconciliation between the Congress and the Muslim League. Dr. Ambedkar said, and I quote him, this is the most important quote. Dr. Ambedkar said, and I quote him, when deciding the destinies of nations, dignities of people, dignities of leaders, dignities of parties ought to count for nothing. The destiny of country ought to count for everything. We must also consider what is going to happen with regard to the future if we act precipitately. Unquote. Warning against acting precipitately, Dr. Ambedkar said that he said that there were only three options for solving the communal problem. First, surrender by one party. Secondly, a negotiated peace. And the thirdly, open war. At this point, Dr. Ambedkar gave debate an entirely new twist. He said that he has been hearing from certain members of the Constituent Assembly that they are prepared to go to war, unquote. And that he was appalled at the idea of, quote unquote, solving the political problems of this country by the method of war, unquote. Quoting Edmund Burke, Dr. Ambedkar warned that if any attempt was made to solve the Hindu-Muslim problem by forcing the Muslim to surrender to the constitution, possibly prepared without their consent, I quote him, this country would be involved in perpetually conquering them, unquote. Dr. Ambedkar concluded his speech by quoting Edmund Burke again, who had said that, and I quote him, it is easy to give power, it is difficult to give wisdom, unquote. Passionately, Dr. Ambedkar added, and I quote him again, let us prove by our conduct that if this assembly has arrogated to itself sovereign powers, it is prepared to exercise them with wisdom. That is the only way by which we can carry with us all sections of our country, there is no other way that can lead us to unity. Unquote. Dr. Ambedkar's speech drew the longest and the most spectacular applause. The speech was earnest, statesmanlike, and without any bitterness. The entire assembly listened to the speech in rapt attention and greeted it with thunderous cheer, applause, and thumping of the desks. This speech was really a turning point. It helped in changing the attitude of the Congress leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru towards Dr. Ambedkar. It was music to the ears of most Congress leaders. This strategic speech changed the course of Dr. Ambedkar's political career. Thereafter, things started happening in a rapid succession. In early 1947, Lord Mountbatten came over from Burma as the new viceroy of our country. Congress leaders expressed the view that the coalition between the Congress and the Muslim League was unworkable. This led to the eventual proposal and acceptance of the partition of India. On 3rd June 1947, the new viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, announced the British government's plan for India's future. The plan envisaged a partition of the country. There would now be two central governments, divided India and Pakistan, and accordingly two constituent assemblies. Gandhiji, who had earlier considered Pakistan a sin, a patent untruth, and had solemnly asked the protagonists of partition to, quote unquote, vivisect me before you vivisect India, unquote. Finally, he changed his mind and instructed Jawaharlal Nehru to sign. At that time, Gandhiji had gone to Noakhali in East Bengal. So Nehru, he instructed Jawaharlal Nehru to sign, quote unquote, an accord with Jinnah, giving him, quote unquote, a universally acceptable and inoffensive formula for his Pakistan, unquote. The following week, then, Jawaharlal Nehru moved a resolution in the All India Congress Committee, which was passed by a vote of 99 to 52. The British Parliament passed the Act of Indian Independence on 15th July 1947, and accordingly, the Constituent Assembly became a sovereign body. Now, since Bengal was partitioned, several members, including Dr. Ambedkar, lost their seats in India's Constituent Assembly. However, with the completely transformed attitude of Congress leadership towards Dr. Ambedkar, when Barrister Jayakar resigned his position in the Constituent Assembly from the Bombay province, Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Patel both suggested Dr. Ambedkar's name to fill the vacancy in July 1947. Thus, Dr. Ambedkar returned to Constituent Assembly, this time with the full support of the Congress party. On 15th August 1947, India became a free nation and Dr. Ambedkar was inducted into the new cabinet of Free India. Prime Minister Nehru appointed Dr. Ambedkar as the Union Minister of Law, apparently under pressure from Gandhiji. Seemingly, Nehru and Patel were lukewarm about allocating a ministerial birth to Dr. Ambedkar, but Gandhiji insisted on his inclusion in the project of national construction. This conjecture is further supported by a conversation between Gandhiji and two visiting foreigners. When Gandhiji had two visiting foreigners, when Gandhiji reportedly had reportedly expressed the wish that Dr. Ambedkar should become a part of the first government of independent India. Dr. Ambedkar was made a member of the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution on 29th August 1947. Subsequently, he was chosen as the chairman of the drafting committee the very next day. As the first Union Minister of Law of independent India and as the chairman of the drafting committee for the proposed Indian Constitution, Dr. Ambedkar was now at the zenith of his political career. His new responsibilities gave him an indelible place in laying down the foundation of modern India. None of these events, in my own view, could have happened without the consent of Mahatma Gandhi. As the supreme commander of India's freedom struggle, Mahatma Gandhi was a de facto, he was in charge, the remote control, some might say, against the backdrop of series of conflicts, confrontations, and often bitter exchange of words between the two great men, time and again, for as many as the preceding 17 long years. It came as a great surprise to everyone, including Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar. It is not clear who, if any, persuaded Gandhiji to arrive at such a momentous decision. Going by the scanty research available, it could not have been either Jawaharlal Nehru or Vallabhbhai Patel, whose response was said to be lukewarm. Apparently, it was a decision made by Gandhiji himself on his own. If that is the case, it would be truly an overwhelmingly generous gesture on the part of Gandhiji. It was Dr. Ambedkar who had said earlier, 17th December 1946, in the Constituent Assembly, in his maiden speech, that, and I quote him again, when deciding the destinies of nation, dignities of the people, dignities of the leaders, and dignities of party ought to count for nothing. The destiny of the country ought to count for everything. Mahatma Gandhi had actually done it, setting an example for others to emulate, befitting the title of Mahatma, that's a great soul, and of course, the father of the nation. Well, friends, let's conclude our session here. But before I leave, let me request you, if you like Bhim Bhashya, my audio-visual podcast series, then please do like it, please share it, please subscribe to it. So long until we meet again real soon. Thank you. Namaskar.